It's such a beautiful, beautiful way for writers all over North America to come together. And like Carrie said, it's not all writers; it's women of all different kinds of walks. And so, you're going to get a chance to hear from an amazing Redbud right now, who can maybe share in a moment how long she's been a Redbud for. But Carlene, what a beautiful soul. And when I read that she's an award winning marketing communicator, I thought, I need to talk to this woman because I love marketing. And I love how honest Carlene is. When we were planning this, she was very honest about her journey. And so she is passionate about creating belonging and being really open about her mental health struggles. And so I just want us all to welcome Carlene Hill Byron. Welcome, my friend. Share your heart with us today.
Well, there we go. I'm unmuted. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Connie and the Redbud Writers Guild, for getting us all together. Today's topic is about navigating circumstances that are unexpected to us. And we're all navigating some pretty unexpected circumstances right now, aren't we? Some of us are having to be at home from work. Some of us are having to work from home. Some of us are at our jobs, but we're wearing masks or working behind plastic shields. We go to supermarkets to shop and there's no flour, there's no toilet paper. We know now, in a way much more real than we sometimes remember, that our friends and our family members and the people we love can become suddenly ill and at risk of death at any moment. These are things that we don't plan for. We're not expecting them. And yet we have to keep moving and keep living our lives in the face of these unexpected circumstances when we're unsure what is the right direction and whether our footing is safe. Now, someone like me who lives with a mental illness is likely to be a champion of living with the unexpected. We live with all the same unexpected circumstances you do: COVID confinement, job loss and economic turndown, disappointing outcomes after hard work, the loss or death of people we love. But we also live with a lot of unexpected circumstances that are specific to our mental illnesses. We live with unexpected interior circumstances. For me, that's extremely low and extremely high emotional states. My diagnosis is bipolar disorder. Those interior circumstances that we experience sometimes play out in behaviors that other people find unexpected or upsetting. And as a result of upsetting other people, we sometimes find ourselves in new unexpected circumstances. Maybe the loss of a job or damage or loss to a relationship that's important to us. Before I start describing some of the unexpected challenges that I've negotiated that are specifically related to my diagnosis, I do want to remind you, as Connie said, I'm a working professional. I'm 62 years old. I've been supporting myself for more than 4 decades. I have friends, I have family, I have a church, I have a community where I live and volunteer. Life involves navigating unexpected circumstances for every one of us. The circumstances that I navigate are different from yours. They're simply the circumstances that I navigate to live the life that I have. So I'm going to start telling you just a little bit about the experience of living with my mental illness. I was first diagnosed when I was 19. That means I've been medically treated for mental illness for more than 4 decades. The treatment journey itself has been full of unexpected circumstances. Now, the first and most remarkable to me of all those unexpected circumstances was when I got the first right medication. I hope that you never experience what it is like to live with a really debilitating depression. What I can tell you about what it was like to have the right medication for the first time after 7 years of medical treatment was that for the first time, I smelled a field of clover hot under the sun. My brain was not so full of fog and darkness that there was no room for anything to get in. I was able to have conversations with people and actually understand why people enjoyed talking to people because there was room for me to encounter you and enjoy your presence. So finding the first right medicine was, and the way that affected me was a wonderful unexpected circumstance. Even finding the right treatment was unexpected enough. I had been in treatment at that point for 7 years, and my discovery of the doctor who gave me the right medicine was in itself just a remarkable circumstance. It happened because one Sunday, a visitor who sat behind me at church, who I happened to chat with, later that same week showed up in the elevator at my workplace when I was in the elevator. And in that elevator conversation, she referred me to a doctor out of town who had trained overseas. And the medicine that he prescribed for me, which is commonly used where he comes from and still is not commonly used in the US, is the only antidepressant that works for me. So remarkable, unexpected circumstances of both finding the first effective treatment and what life was like with that treatment. Some of the other unexpected circumstances I have dealt with have been equally unexpected and somewhat less uplifting. During one 7-year period later in my treatment journey, doctors attempted 18 different new medicines on me in combinations of as many as 5 at a time. I'm going to describe just a few of the unexpected circumstances I had to navigate during that time. I gained 60 pounds in 18 months. Imagine trying to maintain a professional wardrobe when you're gaining a full size every 6 months. I became so disoriented that one day I got lost coming home from the stores where I usually shop. I became so forgetful that I couldn't remember my boss's directions for as long as it took to walk from his desk to his office door. Now, those are just a few of the unexpected and distressing circumstances that my medical treatment created. So during a period of about 7 years, I would go from week to week, month to month, really not knowing where I was stepping or what I was going to be stepping into. My church has played a really important role in keeping me stable and steady through those unexpected circumstances. And I want to describe some of the ways that my church has helped at that time. First of all, church was a habit for me. I had the habit of going to church, going to Bible study, praying weekly with a prayer partner. It feels odd to listen to people talking about a good God who makes all things good all the time when your experience is so askew, but there I was. It was my habit. And sometimes you experience a great sense of belonging from something as simple as knowing what you're going to find if you keep showing up. Second, my prayer partner, Cecilia, had been at that point my prayer partner for more than 2 years. We met in a women's Bible study that was organized to make it easy for anyone to establish solid relationships. Instead of leaving us fellowship time to find each other, this teacher organized us into groups of 3 to pray together for the first half hour of each meeting. Same group every week. So by the end of the 12-week study, our group of 3 was sufficiently close that a quarter century later, we're still in touch. I still talk with Cecilia at least twice a month. So when Cece would come over on Wednesday night for our regular weekly prayer, I felt able to tell her what was happening. She was able to listen. And in her very calm, very British way, she let me know that she still knew I was me. This isn't what has always been happening, she would tell me. I know that things are going to change for the better. And until you're even able to imagine that, I'm going to believe it for you, and I will pray in your place. Cecilia ensured that I maintained my sense of belonging to God and among God's people at a time when my experiences were so dark that so dark, so difficult, so many challenges piling on top of each other out of control, that I really couldn't hold those things for myself. The third thing that my church accomplished for me was that it offered a structure for lay pastoral care. In our church, we called it a Stephen ministry, which is a popular program across the United States. It's a form of organized lay chaplaincy. I'm under the impression that the training for a Stephen minister is a lot like the training that I have as a volunteer hospital chaplain in my local hospital system here. A Stephen minister listens and they pray. They visit one congregation for 1 week, 1 hour a week, no more than 6 months at a stretch. And Amanda, who was sent to me, sat with me for an hour a week during this period of time when I did not know from week to week what weird and unexpected thing my medicine was going to do to me next. What I did know was that week to week, Amanda would be present. Her steady presence was another stabilizing influence when I was in circumstances that would not settle down. My church also afforded me a sense of purpose at this time. And of course, what purpose looks like is different for everyone because God has made us all different with different abilities and interests. In that particular church, I taught budgeting. I enjoyed helping people talk about a subject that for many is a taboo or difficult one. For some reason, they were able to talk with me and I was able to help them make wiser choices. That was rewarding. So I've just alluded to a few valuable elements of stability and mental health that I gained from my congregations during times when my mental illness or the treatments for it created a great many unexpected circumstances for me. My congregations provided me a sense of belonging based in predictable and stable relationships. They provided me a sense of purpose based in my use of the gifts God has given me to serve the people of God. They offered a sense of meaning, which ultimately comes from God. My life has meaning because it's given to me by God to accomplish what God wants done for the sake of God's people and God's world. Those three things, meaning, belonging, and purpose, have been understood as core elements of mental health long before we had access to the medicines that many of us use today. And I do say us because I am still medically treated. I currently take 2¼ pills a day, which is a far cry from the 15 pills a day that I was prescribed just a decade ago. And I will say also, I am much more stable in my life and my experience than when constantly changing treatments kept changing my life in so many unexpected ways. Now, this mental health path of meaning, belonging, and purpose that I've mentioned is really pretty well laid out for us in Scripture. I myself have clung for a couple decades to a few verses from the book of Ephesians that speak to me. Chapter 2, verses 8 through 10, for starters. Here, God tells us it is by grace that we are saved through faith, not through works, lest anyone should boast. It's God's work. And this is important to me because I know, thanks to the illness that I have, that my works are often guaranteed to be flawed. I am a fairly chronic screw up. And it's remarkable and wonderful to me that in spite of this, God has chosen to bring me into God's family and that God is keeping me in God's family anyway. In this passage, God goes on to explain that all of us, me included, who have been brought into God's family are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works that God has created in advance for us to walk into. Again, remarkable. I am a work of God, and that God's purpose in creating that work is getting something done here that matters to God. And that thing is not some distant or difficult thing. It is something that God has created already and has created it so that I can walk into it. It is right in front of me. I actually can't miss it. That is a very encouraging thing to me. The other verse in Ephesians that I am so reliant on is in chapter 1, verse 19, where the Apostle Paul prays that the eyes of our hearts would be enlightened so that we might see the glorious riches of God's inheritance in the saints. Listen to that. God wants us to look at each other and see what God sees. Glorious riches, God's inheritance, God's portion. And God wants us to see this when we look at all of us, not just the ones who have our acts together, not just the ones who are successful. God sees this when God sees all of the saints that God has called. When God looks at us, God sees wealth. And that's how God intends us to see ourselves and each other. In all of the uncertainties of this world, God has formed us as followers and has formed us together in his body. That is where we find the meaning, purpose, and belonging that God intends for us. This is where we find our mental health in uncertain times and in all times, in God and in the people of God, in the works that God has prepared for us, and in the abilities God has given us to do those works, which are right in front of us. The footing often seems uncertain. The direction sometimes seems unclear. But this is the reality. God has laid the path, and God has laid its end. Our only task is to walk into it. And so this is the charge from God. Take the next step. Thank you all. Thank you for being with us today.
Wow, Carlene. There's a couple of comments in the chat that are saying, I wish that all churches were like this. And as you were speaking, we felt your heart, and we honor your your forerunning heart, your forerunning spirit that has tackled this before we've even known how to. And you're a brave soul. You're so brave, because I don't think maybe what you shared was all the underneath of the times that maybe you didn't feel understood. And yet there's these women, these two women who stood with you and are still friends. And you're just going to have to go through the chat, Carlene, because people are just responding. And perhaps, Carlene, you could also write down how people can contact you in the chat. Because if you want to reach out to Carlene herself, perhaps you've identified with her story. Perhaps your heart was moved. Please reach out to her. And I do think that it's time for the church to remember that we are such a wonderful village for people in need. And if there's ever been a time where people need this, it's right now. And so thank you for your bravery, Carlene. We love you. You are such a remarkable soul. Oh, wow. One moment, please. Just trying to figure out how to share. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. And I know that I've probably shared my emails again, and now I've shared the wrong PowerPoint. This is what happens when you put me in charge of technology. Where am I? Guys, this is me. You are seeing me right now. This is me right here, not knowing when it comes to technology. My next friend and speaker is Leah. And Leah has had such a journey with her son, as you can see here. Undiagnosed postpartum depression after he was born, and anxiety, and she's parenting children with some challenges. I love that she's a Minnesota girl and a book addict and messy. And so we welcome you, Leah, to share your heart with us today.
Thank you so much, Connie. I really appreciate it. And I'm so grateful for everyone who's here today. I'm honored to be speaking. I thought I was going to be sharing one thing, and God has just been like, nope, this is the story I want you to tell. So hopefully this will, be ministering to you. I want to start with this. Psalm 139. It says, you have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discerning my going out, my lying down, and you are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. I'll go into more of why I shared that in a minute, but when I was 18 years old, I was diagnosed with social anxiety disorder and depression. I had struggled for years with pretty great anxiety around other people, my peers. I couldn't talk on the phone. I hated it when people would watch me write. I had really low self-esteem. I was trying so hard to be accepted and liked, but I just found myself judging myself and seeing myself as less than all the time, and it was exhausting. I eventually developed insomnia and couldn't sleep. I would spend nights crying and crying uncontrollably. And the crazy thing is, I was able to hide all of this from my family. They had no idea of what I was experiencing for years, my high school years, until I finally came out to my parents and told them that not only was I crying all the time and felt hopeless, but I was dealing with suicidal ideation, just constantly thinking of ways to end it all. After I told my parents, they were so gracious and helpful. I've heard stories of others who have not had the same experience as me, but they brought me directly to a counselor. We helped me find a psychiatrist, and like Carlene, was placed on some medications that really made a big difference. I felt like myself again for the first time in years. And that was it was like my eyes were open for the first time when I was 18 years old after those diagnoses. And I was so young at the time. I felt like everything was fixed and better. And I thought that it was all over at that point. I thought that um, I could fix this, I could control this. And I really spent a lot of time going through college thinking that this was something in my grasp, in something that I could, that I could be in charge of, that my feelings could be manipulated in some way. And after college, I did go on to seminary, and in seminary, I decided to go off of my antidepressants. Now, throughout college, I was surrounded by excellent community. I was surrounded by friends and my boyfriend, who's now my husband, and I went to counseling. But in seminary, it was really my time to thrive. Like, it was the best time of my life, I think, because I grew in intimacy with God. I gained a sense of self and confidence. I knew my purpose, kind of like Carlene was talking about. I knew I was gifted and called, and had counselors and mentors who poured into me. And in that time, I was able to go off of my antidepressants, and it was a great time. But then 9 months before graduation, I got pregnant with our firstborn, and we were excited and surprised, as some of those pregnancies go. But what stuck with me at that time was how like myself I felt. I just was so caught up in my schooling, and it was just, I had this strong sense of self, which was so good for me. Unfortunately, the birth of our son did not go as we had hoped or planned. But the day after I finished my final assignment for seminary, I went in for what's called an external version because our son was breech. So he was upside down, head was up by my ribs instead of down below, for a normal birth. And we went in to try to help to turn him, and I had done everything on my own that I could to try to turn him. I went in the pool and did somersaults. I put peas on my belly. Nothing worked. The child would not move. And we went in for an external version. And what ended up happening was they took an ultrasound and found that my fluid levels were extremely low and he needed to be born now. So within an hour, I was in the operating room, and within 45 minutes, he had been born. And that whole experience was so traumatic for me and so exhausting, really disorienting. I felt completely cut off from myself. I felt detached from my life, from my husband, from my son. I went home that day, or 4 days later, just a shell. And I don't remember even really crying. I just remember feeling cut off. And nursing was not going well. We really struggled to develop a bond between my son and myself. I was frustrated and anxious and angry a lot, very resentful. But I felt like this was all my doing. Like I should have been able to do this better. I should have been able to breastfeed better. And when Jack developed colic at 6 weeks and would cry for 3 or 4 hours every single night for 2 months, it's amazing. It's amazing that we are alive today. And I do thank God for that. I do think he gave me the strength to get through that time. At 10 and a half months, when my son was 10 and a half months old, I finally drove myself to a clinic for help in an 8-inch snowstorm in Denver, Colorado. And the doctors were like, why are you here? why are you here? It's a snowstorm. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep going. And I was put on an antidepressant for the first time in years. And it was the first sense of hope I had had in nearly a year, that I could be okay. So when I became pregnant with our second, I began to have flashbacks to those times. I began to have flashbacks to the nights of colic, flashbacks to the birth. I knew that I needed help, and I wasn't on an antidepressant at that time because it wasn't safe. When the medication I had been on wouldn't have been safe for being pregnant. But in that moment of when I found myself spiraling again, it was like something shifted in me, and the shame that I had experienced before that kept me hiding, it was like no, I don't need to be ashamed of my need for help. I don't need to be ashamed that I'm missing certain chemicals in my brain that are causing me to feel this way. So I went into my doctor and I said, I need something. And she graciously did not judge me, but provided it. I went into my counselor and I told her, I'm having these flashbacks. I'm terrified that this is all going to be the same. And she, again, helped me and guided me towards resources. And in that pregnancy, I was exhausted all the time, but I had voices that were telling me, it's okay. You don't need to figure this all out on your own. It's okay. Much like Carlene, I had these people in my life. And one of the things, I just want to share a couple of things that I learned during that time. And I find that this quarantine has been so much like a maternity leave, especially after a surgery when you are recovering for 6 weeks at home. There's the isolation, there is the pressure of caring for other people, there is anxiety and discouragement when things aren't going well. And much like those times, this quarantine has been like my times of my postpartum. And here's a few things that I learned that I needed, and maybe this will help you too. First of all, I had such high expectations of myself, of needing to constantly perform and do and work and be. And what I'm seeing today is so many people who are like, I'm at home now, I can reorganize my entire house, now I can go through closets, now I can take out our deck and put in a new one, or take out the tiles in our bathroom and put in a new bathroom. And I think this is an amazing time for rest. Rest was one of the first things that I needed when I was dealing with my depression and especially postpartum and with parenting. And now I'm parenting children who have ADHD, autism, and anxiety. And rest is a key need that I have. I believe God gave us the Sabbath for us. I believe he gave it for us. In fact, Jesus said, the Sabbath is made for people. People were not made to serve the Sabbath as the Pharisees twisted it. It was made for us. It's a gift for us in order to find restoration in our souls. It's a gift for us to learn how to take care of ourselves. It's a gift. It's a way to worship and connect with God by not doing anything, but just simply being in his presence. So I want to invite you in this time to rest. I know we are forced into rest in some ways, and sometimes that can also lead us to another extreme of Netflixing all the time, of sitting around in our jammies and losing our sense of purpose. I think rest can also be a great sense of purpose if we see it as, I am going to receive God's love for me in this time of rest. 3 years ago, I was experiencing burnout again after my son was diagnosed with autism, and I was managing his emotions all the time as well as my own. And I found that rest was absolutely necessary at that time. But beyond that, I also found myself behaving in ways that I didn't understand. I found myself kind of lost in my behavior, withdrawal, lack of connection. And at that time, I got curious. And I remembered something that my counselor had shared with me when I was pregnant with Ben. She said, I think you are a highly sensitive person. And I was like, what is that? It didn't sound so good at first because I don't want to be called sensitive. It can often be used as, I guess, a derogatory term. She's so sensitive. But when I found a highly sensitive person is someone who takes in a lot of information and processes it deeper than most people. My temperament leads me to have different needs than other people, but 20% of the population is highly sensitive. Furthermore, when 3 years ago, when I was totally burnt out again from caring for my family, I discovered the Enneagram. And the Enneagram has been an amazing tool for understanding myself, as I have learned how to care for myself. I have learned some of the repeated, what's the word I'm looking for? Repeated messages that I hear on end in my head to myself. Those things are unique to me and not unique to me. There are other people who experience them. And as I have grown and in curiosity and understanding myself and sought this out, it reminds me of these verses in Psalm 139 where it says, the Lord searched me and knows me. And as I continue to search myself with the Lord, I too know myself and am better able to take care of myself and my needs. So maybe for you, you are experiencing behaviors and things that you're going, I don't understand why I am acting this way. And this is a time of stress for all of us. This is a time where we are all have been thrown into circumstances that are outside of our control, and we may see stress behaviors that we never experienced before. But the Lord knows us. He created us. Psalm 139 also says, you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. And I'm learning to say with David, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. This has not always come easily for me. In all of my self-doubt and all of my years of, insecurity, This is not an easy thing for me to say. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. But as I've continued to seek out understanding and seeking out caring for myself, receiving God's love, believing He cares for me, this has become easier. It has become easier. And so I am so grateful. As you may have seen in my biography, I have had years of counseling or teaching, also counseling others and teaching. And the more I learn about the Enneagram, the more excited I am about it and the capacity it has for helping people learn more about themselves and to learn how to care for themselves, to learn who God says that they are, the way that they were uniquely created. And that has led me to recently begin training to be an Enneagram coach. Now, in the past, I have counseled others. I have done pastoral counseling, I have done mentoring, and I have done other things. And we always come back to these temperaments. And it's so fun to discover temperaments with other people. And it's so fun to learn who someone else is. So I'm really excited to be doing that. And if you're interested, I would love to walk with that with you. And if you are struggling right now, please know that I see you, that I know. And I just want to end with this prayer from Psalm 139, again, at the very end. And this has been my prayer through anxiety, through when I have anxiety attacks, when I have moments of depression and exhaustion. This has been my prayer. It says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me. See if there's any anxious, depressed, discouraged, any destructive patterns in my life. And lead me, Lord, in the everlasting way." Amen.
Amen. Oh, thank you so much, Leah. Thank you for sharing so vulnerably your story.
Oh, yeah.
And I loved Gina, how she put that, like, thanks for reminding us to stay curious and to rest. And there are many women who can relate to your story, and men.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question in the question and answer. Someone who has a question for you or just a statement, please feel free to reach out to them. And Leah, make sure you post your info in the chat box, because I know that there are many people on the call right now who can relate, even if you haven't had children, just relating to the emotions that Leah was mentioning. Something in your heart just connected with her on that. And so I think the big thing right now that we're trying to do here today in navigating the unexpected is, of course, give tools that we've learned through this, but also to know that you don't have to journey alone. You don't have to do this by yourself. And so we hope that as we continue on, that you feel held, even wherever you are, in your living room or in your bedroom, no matter if you're just sprung out right now, exhausted, or if you're feeling great. We are with you right now, and we are using Zoom to do that. But we hope that you feel held. And Leah, you have created an atmosphere and an environment for us right now to feel held. So thank you so much. You're so precious, and I love the Enneagram. I finally understand my husband.
Thank you. It was so
Thank
good
you.
to
It
be
was
here.
so
I
good to
really
be here. I
appreciate the
really
opportunity.
appreciate the opportunity.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Well, I am going to, oh, look at that. I went to my point. There is a God. I want to introduce the next speaker, Judy Douglas. I have adored for years. I have a very similar story, but farther ahead, down the road. She works with Crew. I think that she has a really personal connection to Crew. She's authored 6 books and Grandma to 10. Judy, you are a rock star. You are about to hear her story of how she, a 15-year journey with a prodigal son. And so Judy, we welcome you today to share your heart with us.
Thank you, Connie, and thank you for pulling this together. It's Connie who's made this happen, and we are very, very grateful. So, what an incredible opportunity for me to be with you. And my story is a little different. I'm going to talk about some things I learned on at least 15 years of journeying with a prodigal. Now, you may have a prodigal, and so that's exactly what you're hoping to hear from me. But even if you don't have a prodigal, I would imagine the unexpected nature of our situations right now has brought up some tensions with children that might not have been there. And so maybe these will be some helpful things as well for you to be able to understand what's going on and how it comes about. First, let me give you let me say this. A lot of what I am talking about can be read more in depth in my book, When You Love a Prodigal, 90 Days of Grace for the Wilderness. So that's in the little packet that we have available if people want to purchase it. But yes, that's where this comes from. Actually, it comes from my life. Um, so the unexpected thing that happened to us was God sent us this boy. We had just moved to Florida. My two daughters were 11 and 9. And God said to me one day, I'm going to send you a son. And I said, no, thank you. And he says, oh, yes, we're going to give you a son. And I'm like, I don't need a son. And he said, oh, you have no idea how much you need this boy. And he will be a gift to you. So a few weeks later, a friend said, can you take this boy? And God said, this is my gift for you. Now, it took a year before he actually came to us as a foster child. Later, we adopted him. But he was so cute. He was, when we first met him, 9. And then when he came into our home, he was almost 10. And going into 3rd grade, because his birth mom had rarely made him go to school. And he was cute and active. That's an understatement. And athletic and just lots of fun things about him. But he was also incredibly wounded, which we knew very little about. And we learned a lot. Because of his mother's drug and alcohol addiction, which she was doing while she carried him, he had all sorts of issues that come from fetal alcohol syndrome. And the first one that you would ever hear about is the inability in the brain to do cause and effect reasoning. Now that is a serious issue in life. If you can't figure out that if you do this, this happens. And it was just amazing to us how he didn't get things like that. But there was more. He had some learning disabilities. He also had reactive attachment disorder, which is because everybody in his life had abandoned him. He was sure we would as well. We were just more people. In this case, he didn't even know us, and he ends up in our home. And so he was sure we would abandon him, reject him as his dad who never showed up, his mother who chose her addictions, and even his beloved grandparents who still beloved relationship, but they just couldn't do it. They said, we're already raising your half sister. We can't add this boy. And so God sent him to us. And the first 3 years when he was a foster child were challenging. He was not bad. He just was out of control somewhat and had so many needs. The need for attention was incredible, which robbed my daughters of a lot of my time and attention, and was one of the worst things about it to me was, in a sense, he stole me from my daughters in a lot of ways. And I had to deal with that guilt feeling from that. But he just was needy, and he had no patterns in his life. So when we said we go to bed at such and such time, we get up and we go to school, he's like, what? And that we don't watch anything you might want to watch on TV, or we sit at a table and have dinner together as a family. Those were unheard of things in his life. And so we were working through those. But then they terminated his mother's rights and he's up for adoption. And after a fair amount of prayer and talking with the whole family, we decided, yes, we should adopt him. And I thought, oh, he's going to feel secure now. He's going to calm down a little because he's going to know we really love him and accept him and want him. Not. Uh, he went into middle school. Now, mind you, he was almost 13. He's big as it is. So sixth grade boys, you know, aren't very tall. And he towered over them, and he found out there was great power in size. And so he could get money or whatever else he wanted from the little kids. He also couldn't sit still or be quiet. So he spent most of his middle school time in alternative classroom. The school, I got to know everybody at the school because, you know, they had to talk to me about what Josh had done. Josh is his name. I guess I hadn't said that. And it was a hard thing. And finally, the school said, one more incident, and he's out of here. And God led us to put him in a program, a Christian residential program that we went through with him. And that was wonderful and not so wonderful, but lots of good things happened there. They had 1,000 rules, and so Josh was sure to break them, as all the kids there did. But there were immediate, firm consequences. And so he began to learn cause and effect reasoning at a much faster level. People loved him and cared for him, and he met Jesus there, and that was a wonderful thing. And when he came home to live with us again, he really wanted to do well. He wanted his life to be different. He wanted to walk with God. And I was homeschooling him to catch him up on grade level. He said, please, please let me go to school. And we were really skeptical, but we had lots of parameters, and we said, okay. And took him about 3 weeks at school before he found all his old friends. He had joined a gang before, and so he was back with his gang friends and skipping school most of the time, which the school didn't bother to tell me. And I'm a fairly trusting person, even yet I was. Later, I kind of lost some of that. But so things actually got a lot worse. And what before had been more uncomfortable, inconvenient, not a great time, all of a sudden became filled with a lot of bad things. There were drugs and alcohol and crime, stealing from us, stealing from others. Did I say girls? Oh yeah, lots of girls. And he went through cars, and it was a hard time. He spent a little time in juvenile detention, a little bitty time in jail, and it became harder and harder. And he was angry. He was an angry person. And I didn't know why he was angry, because we were loving him. We were trying to get good friends in his life, having lots of family times together, and nothing was taking away his anger. And that's when I began to learn something that was important for me. And that was, just because somebody's rebellious and acting out and doing destructive things for their own lives doesn't mean that they're really rebellious. It doesn't mean that this is all because they want to do these things, that this has a lot to do with what's happened to them, either in their past, especially in the case of adopted kids. Even if they are babies when you adopt them, there are things from their past that are there that affect them and their sense of security and their sense of personhood and who they are, and there's a lot of pain involved. But kids, whether it's in our homes or whether it's at the playground or in school, there are rejections, there are bullying, there are teachers who aren't fair to them. There are lots of things that cause trauma in a kid's life. And that trauma is often the cause of the things that we see when they act out and the things that they do. And when I began to realize that, I was open to some things God was teaching me. And I also began to have more compassion and not think it was all he just makes bad choices. He did make bad choices, but it wasn't all because he wanted to. It was the acting out of the pain for our son. The biggest thing he did um, was alcohol became his comfort. And he was an alcoholic, and I had no idea how much he was drinking. He told me once, he says, well, I went through about a 12 pack a day there for a long time of beer. And it was a hard time. All of that to say, what did we do and what made the difference for where he is now, which I'll tell you at the end of our time. So I want to tell you just some quickly several things that I hope will be helpful for understanding, and I'll end with something practical and helpful. So the first thing, when kids act out, they often get pushed away, kind of, and you're protecting your own heart. And so God says in Jeremiah, in the Word, stand at the crossroad and look, ask for the ancient paths, ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. And just like Leah was talking about, finding rest is incredibly important when you're in any unusual time like we all are, or in a traumatic time, or struggles with a person that you care about especially. Where are we going to find rest? And I found for us, the most important thing we could do is seek to maintain relationship. Everyone else had not done that, and they would push him away, or they would just condemn him. And God says, don't lose the relationship. Now, that didn't mean there weren't hard things that had to be taken care of. There were, but to do them in a way that didn't lose the relationship. Now, I was told, and if you have a prodigal, you may have been told, well, the answer is tough love. Everybody would say tough love. You just got to make decisions. And what I found is that tough love doesn't work. Yes, there are things that are good about it, but it basically is a push away. It is a rejection to that person. It is not a welcoming arm, but a pushing away. And so they often, you lose relationship because of the way that you've gone about. We know we did these things. So I'm not talking about you necessarily, but what I did. And God helped me understand that, yes, you need really good boundaries. You need to have some guidelines in your home, whether there are still children in your home or they're adults. And Josh was in and out of our home till he was about 27 or 8. So you have to have those boundaries that are clear, but they're established not by saying, and if you do that again, you're out of here, which is not an uncommon thing that gets said to them. And instead, to sit down together and talk about what the values in your home are, and why these things are acceptable and these things are not acceptable. And then with them kind of say, all right, we agree, this matters in our home. What are the consequences when we can't do that? Well, you might say one thing, but they might have some good ideas of some consequences. And the more they are involved in the discussion and the setting of guidelines, boundaries, and consequences, the more likely they are to commit, to adhere to them. And I like natural consequences as much as possible. I have stories on that, and God provided lots of times. But sometimes you have to decide, if you do this, this is the consequence. But here's where I want to really go. All of this conversation, this keeping the relationship, there are 3 words that God gives that have helped us immensely in doing this with our son. The first is love. God's kind of love. Now think for a minute, what has someone in your life done that strained your love for them, that you thought, can I keep loving this person? Maybe not quite, but at least a strain in it. Josh did something stupid, ended up getting in trouble with the law and actually got worse penalty than he should have for what it was. But they were kind and they just gave him some community service. He was like 21 at this time. He was living with us. We were just finishing his high school. And so he would get the car every Saturday morning and say, I'm going to my community service. Not, he didn't go, but the first time. But every week he told me he was. And finally, the person who was in charge of that called and said, is Josh still around? And I said, yes. He hasn't been coming. So we found out. But it made me really angry that he lied to me and he didn't do what he was supposed to get better. And oh my goodness, I was not happy. And I thought, is it worth it to keep loving this kid who rejects everything you do for him, who keeps using stupid things? And the Lord said in Jeremiah, the Lord appeared to us in the past saying, I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have drawn you with loving kindness. He says his love is never ending. He loves us no matter what we do. It's unconditional. And he says it's the way I draw you is with loving kindness. I'm not beating you on the head all the time. Yes, there are consequences, but he loves us and he wants us to love. Then you might think like I did, I can't love like that. He says, well, but I've given you my love. And because I've loved you, my love is available to you. In fact, he actually told me that very specifically. I was really having a hard time loving this kid. And God said, Judy, I am going to share my love for Josh with you. And it was like he opened me up and he took this huge vat and he poured it into me. He says, this is my love for that boy. And I'm letting you have it to do what you need to do to love him. And he does that for every single one of us. He loves us, but he shares that love. It's a flow through kind of thing. The love he has for us is available to give to other people. And it's not ours. We can't manufacture it. I remember I actually fell in love with the kid as a result, and he kind of was born in my heart as my son instead of the boy God sent us. And I said to the Lord, well, can he ever love me? And Josh, to him, if he loved me, that was a betrayal of his birth mom, who was still around and whom he loved. And so the Lord said, Judy, unconditional. Tell me about the conditions that go with unconditional. Oh yeah, no conditions. He says, I have no conditions on my love for you. I will help you grow and work on things in your life, but I will love you no matter what. And so you can love Josh no matter what. You're not dependent on the conditions being met for your love. So, I'm going to go on to the next one. I have more stories. I always have more stories. The second word is mercy. Our God loves mercy. And you might think, well, this person in my life, this child doesn't deserve mercy. They're doing these things on purpose. And they keep repeating the same thing. Listen to what God says. The faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies never cease, never cease, never cease. Great is his faithfulness. Every morning there's new mercy available for us. I remember the time that Josh stole from us not infrequently, and for some reason that didn't bother me as much as when he started stealing from his sisters. And that bothered me a great deal. Oh dear, whoops. Sorry, my computer stopped. You know, if you don't touch it forever, it stops. He would steal from his sisters, and I was so angry and was finding it hard to show mercy to him. God says in Nehemiah, but in your great mercy, after the Israelites had done all sorts of terrible things, you did not put an end to them or abandon them. For you are a gracious and merciful God. Mercy triumphs over judgment, we hear from James. And so God says the same is true. We can show mercy. And finally, let me talk to you just a minute about grace. Grace is God's unconditional giving of that love and that mercy. It's the giving no more. We don't deserve it. It's what he gives us. He says he is able to make all grace abound to you, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. God told me many times, when you make mistakes with this kid, and you will, and I did, make them on the side of grace. And I found that our voice, our mouth, is the way we do the most damage with lack of grace. So I'm just going to read this little thing about some ways to make sure that what comes out of your mouth is filled with grace. This is just some practical things to do. And the first that I would mention is wait. When you find yourself about to say something harsh or unkind, or it may be true, but the way that it's coming out of your mouth, wait. You know, the proverbial count to 10 before you speak, or 20 or 50, whatever you need. Second, moderate. Speak slowly, calmly, gently, but firmly. Don't let your voice rise. Don't let the anger come out in your voice. Instead, moderate your voice. Think. Will these words add fuel to the fire of what's going on with us right now? Consider, would you like someone to speak such words in that tone of voice to you? How would you feel if your friend or spouse or anyone spoke to you like that? Recognize, and this is really important, the words you speak today may be part of your relationship with your prodigal for all the years to come. Something sticks in their mind that we say, and they believe it from then on. So we have to remember, is this what we want them to think later? Realize your tone of voice can turn neutral words into destructive words. And then remember, you love this person. Before you speak the harshness that you're feeling, remember you love this person. And then pray. Stop to pray before you speak. Make sure you're filled with God's Spirit. Ask him to govern your tongue, to release his love into your heart, to choose to be an instrument of God's grace. Okay, I could talk forever. Josh is 37 now. He's on his second marriage. It's a good one. He has a stepdaughter and he has two little girls, one of whom in 2 days will be 1 month old. So I haven't gotten to hold that baby yet. He has gone from what my husband called the most creative work avoider he'd ever seen to the hardest working person I've ever seen. God has done a work. He is certainly not in a perfect place yet, but he has grown and changed so much. And it's worth a 15-year prodigal wilderness journey. So thank you so much.
Judy, you've given so much courage to our own story. You are amazing. And I wonder how people out there today, when you were talking about unconditional love, I wonder how many have ever felt void of that, have ever felt, I wish I had someone to love me. And I just want to take a moment to pause and space to what does it look like? Know that you are unconditionally loved? and to know that perhaps that comes from your creator, your father. He is a father to the fatherless, and he brings all of us who have orphan hearts to him. And you may or may not believe in God, and we're not here to preach at you, but we are definitely here to offer you an opportunity to know that unconditional love, like Judy has said here, and all the things that you talked about, Judy, with grace and mercy. Oh, may we know that that's ours to have from a Father who freely gives. Thank you so much for that, Judy. We love you. I want to, someone asked if we're taking a break at any time, if anyone needs to use the washroom. I mean, it's harder for us. We're not going to go to the washroom with you. We are going to press pause. But if any time you just need to take a break, please feel free. But I'm excited to have our friend Carrie here. She is a professional counselor and has quite the story. Actually, Carrie, when I read this, that you had a 1.5 year long process of searching for your husband in the wilderness, I literally pictured you in gumboots looking through the, and so I am so curious about what you mean, but we're just so thankful that you're here, and we just give you full permission to share your story and your heart with us today.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you. And Judy, I just want to say thank you for sharing from your heart, everyone who's spoken so far. And I'm struck at the hard lessons that we learn from losses in life. We all have them. But they seem to be tailor-made lessons. At least mine have been just the lessons that I needed. So I'm wondering, what do you do when the bottom falls out of your life? When everything seems upside down and confusion reigns supreme, kind of like Alice through the looking glass. That's what this COVID time has felt like a bit to me. And it's also reminded me of the strange season I went through a few years ago when my husband went missing. I think we've all felt some of that sense of disorientation. Some people have lost jobs, lost family members even. But regardless of our particular circumstances, I think we've all lost something. We've all lost a sense that life would most likely continue on with a basically predictable rhythm. You know, I think we had a belief that we knew how to do our lives. But now, all of the balls have been thrown up in the air, and we know eventually they'll land somewhere. We just don't know where. So part of our challenge is learning to live in that in-between space, that limbo of sorts that we're experiencing globally at this point. I'm noticing in my work with clients who had any kind of underlying symptoms of anxiety or depression or significant relationship issues, that there's definitely an uptick in their symptoms for most people ever since COVID came on the scene. And then many people who've never experienced chronic anxiety or depression are getting a taste of it for the first time. And I think it's safe to say that no one wants to continue to go down that path. So this morning, I want to share just a few strategies with you, things I've learned both in my role as a therapist, but also when the tables were turned a few years ago and I was thrust into my own personal trauma. In 2014, I got a late night phone call, I think it was Saturday night, from my pastor, 10 p.m., saying my husband, Steve, was missing from the church's yearly men's backpacking trip. That's impossible, I remember thinking. He's with all of those guys. How could he be missing? It's interesting how the mind works when we go into shock. It was just too much to take in. So the next morning, as my sister Anna and I were making the 6-hour drive north, search and rescue teams from all over the state had started searching for him. But when that search ended, after just 4.5 days, the challenge of finding him fell on us. So after a few weeks of absolutely immobilized shock and no clue what to do, I got this email from a private pilot, and his name's Jim. And he was saying, I have some experience with searches, and I have a helicopter, and I think Steve could still be out there, so I'd like to help you. And talk about a gift. Talk about a gift that just dropped into my email and into my life. So I went from feeling absolutely powerless to feeling a sliver of hope. And that was the beginning of a 1.5 year long journey to find my husband. But that story is a long story, and much too long for our purposes this morning. But I do want to share a chapter of that story with you. There were lots of chapters. God taught me so many things. But this particular chapter happened in late fall, a couple of months into our search process. By this point, we didn't really hold out any hope that my husband was still alive. But we did want to at least figure out what happened to him, where he was, and maybe find some remains so that we could have some measure of closure. I know that sounds gruesome, but if you've ever been in a situation anywhere near this, there's a hunger for closure that is hard to explain. I needed it. My daughter needed it. Steve's family and my family needed it. And the men who had been on the trip with him, they needed it. And then especially our church family, they had been meeting every day at noon for weeks to pray for his return. So they needed some closure also. On this particular week, 15 of us were involved in the search. 4 women, again, this is like this amazing gift. Volunteers, all volunteers. Everyone I'm talking about just volunteered. 4 women who had flown in from Montana and Colorado with their search dogs to help us. Then there was Jim and another pilot who flew in by helicopter. Hang on for 1 second, I'm having a technical problem here. There we go. And then there was Joe, our tracker, who lived near the search zone. And then the rest of us, my sister Anna, me, 6 men from my church who I had known a little bit, but not that much. It's a big church. All of us made the 6-hour drive up from the San Francisco Bay Area to this remote alpine wilderness. It had been a long time since we gathered that morning, standing around, eating some breakfast, praying, heading out before the sun came up. That's how we had to do it. And we made our way, climbed in our big SUVs, made our way up the winding maze of dirt logging roads, bumping along to our base camp. And then we spent the day in teams of 2 or 3, searching specific areas where the dogs had shown some interest the day before. So Connie, yes, I was tromping around in my gum boots, as you say. I think that's hiking boots, maybe, Canadian style. Yeah, so tromping around through the woods. And now it's evening, and at this end of the day, almost dark again, we're all back at the cabin. And we're sitting around the long rectangular table in this cozy pine, knotty pine, sweet space. Looking around, everyone's freshly scrubbed from their showers, and the women's long hair still damp. And I think we were all feeling that good kind of tired you get when you've been doing physical work outside all day. And we're sitting around the dinner table, work done, we could just relax, fill our hungry bellies, very hungry bellies. And there was a sense of camaraderie in the air. We shared stories of the day's adventures and misadventures, talked a bit about our lives back at home. And I remember thinking, these are all such great people. Selfless, look at what they're giving me. All this time, all this energy, all this work. Brave, because it was dangerous what we were doing. And Steve would just, my husband, he would just love these guys. So we're passing around the food, and I turned to my left, half expecting to see him there because he so often sat on my left, right, the side of my heart. And I thought, he should be here. He should be experiencing this with me. You know, this is beautiful, actually, and he should be here. But of course he couldn't, because his absence was the reason we were there in the first place. And with that thought, there it was, that familiar grief, so familiar by this point that it almost felt like part of my body. There was a heavy, painful warmth spreading across my chest, trying to get my attention. And then the question was, would I let it get my attention? Would I let it have a seat at this table? Did it belong here? I knew from my work as a therapist that if I kept pushing it away, pushing it down, I could easily end up depressed, sliding down a dark hole I might never come out of. I wanted to be as brave as my clients, who had been healing by learning the fine art of paying attention to all of their emotions. I had been helping them do that for 25 years, I think, helping them listen to their own emotions, the positive ones and the darker ones. So in that moment of decision, sitting there at the table with these wonderful people, I privately let that grief wash over me. I let myself feel it as I looked around. But I didn't stay in that state long before I could hear the gentle whisper of the Holy Spirit. He was saying, yes, Carrie, this is painful, and I'm here with you in it. And look around you. Look for the beauty. It has a place at the table as well. You can see it. And so I did. I breathed in. I let my heart soak it all in. The cabin that had been donated for our use again and again. The smell of the homemade lasagna that a neighbor, a cabin neighbor, had left in the fridge with $100 bill sitting on top. That's what we were eating that night. Then over there on the counter, there was a fresh peach pie that Megan, the resort owner, manager, had left on the kitchen table next to a vase of flowers that greeted us when we arrived for that particular search. All these good things, but especially the people around this table. These people, these good people who had given so much of their time and energy to come tromp around these woods with us, enduring the weather, the crazy steep terrain, with fresh evidence every day of mountain lion and bear activity around us. These people I didn't really even know well. Some of them I didn't know at all before Steve went missing. And yet, here they were. They came again and again and again for a year and a half. And now they're my friends. They're my lifelong friends. They're never losing me, even though they maybe days they wish they could. They're never losing me. I'm not losing them. And then next to me on the other side was my sister, Anna, who had been with me, holding me up by my side from the very beginning of this crazy, traumatic, dramatic season. So yes, the pain was searing, and the beauty was overwhelming. Yes, and. So this is the thing that saved me, that helped me keep moving forward for the next year and a half of searching. Through all of the unknowns, the stress, the disorientation, the loss. Learning to be as honest as I could with myself and others about the pain, while at the same time paying attention to the love and the beauty, to all the signs that I still lived my life in the presence of a good God. So it's meant learning to live with both authenticity and gratitude at the same time. So I've been thinking about how we can apply this idea to our lives today, living alongside this COVID virus with all the loss and changes that it brings, all the disorientation. First, I want to debunk a myth. The myth that there's no place for negative emotions, especially for Christians. I'm not advocating becoming a slave to our emotions or letting our emotions override the role of reason in our lives. But I am suggesting they have an important God-given purpose. The way we feel in reaction to an event tells us something about who we are. It highlights what's important to us. Sometimes it helps us notice there's a problem we need to address. Or sometimes it simply shows us what we need. So even negative emotions need a place at the table. If we ignore them or push them down, way out of our awareness, then not only do we lose the benefit of learning from them, but as I said before, we also risk depression, because depression thrives in an atmosphere of pressed down or depressed emotion. And when grief is strong and we're tempted to just jump past the pain of loss, that can set us back by keeping us stuck and unable to move through a healthy grieving process and move forward with our lives. We can just stay stuck in our grief forever. So when it comes to COVID, we've all collectively been through some different stages. And the first, I think, was shock and disorientation. But now in this phase, it seems that the complexities of our situation and how much it may cost us are starting to become more real. And at times, the challenges, if we think ahead, can feel insurmountable. Then as we feel the losses stack one on top of another, the question is, how do we live honestly with all of this emotion without becoming overwhelmed? I have a few ideas about that. First being, the most important being, to commit to paying attention. Paying attention to that God-given feedback loop, giving our emotions a seat at the table. One way to do that is that our bodies often give us clues as to powerful emotions that are being pushed down. We might have a tight jaw, a loss of appetite, back pain, heaviness in our chest. So taking the time to scan and take stock of our bodies in a mindful way can give us lots of information. It can also be helpful to spend some time most days giving expression to what's going on. For some of you, that might be through venting with a friend. When I was up at the searches and doing that whole process, I have a friend in Virginia, my best friend, who I would call every morning, and I would vent and share my fears, and we would pray. Sometimes I couldn't pray, so she would just pray for me. So that was so helpful to me. Or maybe it's painting or some other form of creative expression. I have one sister who's a painter. I have one sister who creates art with paper. For me, I have discovered that writing, journaling gives me a way to process the emotions of the day, connects me to other people when I share it, and it releases some of that charge that can get built up if I just try to push it down. And then, of course, as I said earlier, there's that healing counterbalance of paying attention to beauty at the same time. And I gotta say, I'm sure you've noticed that it's all around us if we just look and listen for it. It's in all kinds of places lately. My neighborhood, I was walking yesterday, is a friendlier place. It's actually populated by families. You know, I see husbands and wives and children together, which is lovely. Other neighborhoods are having regular porch time, not mine yet, where they gather, say 4 o'clock every day, and chat and have a little snack. Oh, and then there are the medical professionals. My daughter's about to move to New York to begin her job as an EMT, brand new job, brand new career. And they, every time I hear stories of them or I think of them, I am struck at the level of courage that they're demonstrating. I'm not sure I could measure up to that. I find it stunning. I will never look at nurse, ER doc, respiratory therapist, hospital janitor in the same way again for the rest of my life, because they're so heroic. Men and women are sewing masks for strangers, bright masks, colorful ones, funny ones, glamorous ones, sequins. I like that. One woman in my Zoom walking group is crocheting with her sister. They're both working on the same project. And they started at the same time on the same pattern. And they're in 2 different locations, of course, because there's social distancing. And so they work together, and if one of them makes a mistake and she has to rip out her work, the other sister just waits for her. I think that's lovely. They wait for each other, they catch up, working side by side. They're going to finish at the same time with something beautiful. Another woman in the same group, who's a singer, told us that this is my walking group, now it's a Zoom group. She told us that she has started singing to her dad. Her dad has Parkinson's, and it's a struggle for him to talk these days. So she was finding phone calls or Zooming wasn't really working. So now she just calls him, and he feels no pressure to respond because he's just listening, and she's singing. She's singing to him.
Carrie, that is so beautiful.
Isn't it beautiful?
It is. It's so beautiful. And you know what I really loved about your talk here is that you've allowed us to realize that negative emotions are okay, and that grief is something to embrace. Stephanie mentioned lamentation is a lost art, and then now you've ended with these beautiful stories of just what practical things people are doing. I just want to honor you for your experience and everything that you've brought. Your story is unbelievable. I can't imagine searching for my husband for that long, and we just thank you so much for being here today with us. And please make sure you write your contact info in the chat. If anyone has any questions specifically for Carrie. She is a counselor. She is a professional. And if you're needing any specific help right now, maybe you don't know how to work through grief. Maybe you don't know how to hold negative emotion. Maybe you were never taught that. We were never taught that in the church growing up. Please, she is here right now as a resource, and I would invite you to fully engage with her. But thank you so much, Carrie. Thanks for being here. Oh, and I think I mentioned, please make sure you put your info in the chat as well. Another,
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you so much, Carrie.
Thank you.
And Stephanie is here as well. You know, she has lots of experience with children's mental health affecting the family. And you know, some of you may not have children. Some of you may not, you know, have the same stories as the people who've presented so far. But I want to remind you that these are basically relationship 101. You know, and right now we're with our families and we're in quarantine. And so take the nuggets to be based on your situation, whether you have a child with mental health issues or not, whether you have a child that's been hard, whether you've lost your someone. We all have things that we can apply everything that everyone has spoken so far. And so Stephanie, she is going to really also give some more practical tools. So welcome, Stephanie.
I have just been so impressed and transformed with all the stories that are shared this morning from my Redbud sisters. I feel like I have an imprint in my soul from all that's been shared. So yes, I'm going to share with you some steps in a moment for how to navigate this path of raising children with mental illness. I want to start out by just letting you know that when I was pregnant with my first child, I made a beeline exit to the nearest bookstore, which happened to only be a few blocks away from my doctor's office, to pick up a copy of the iconic book, What to Expect When You're Expecting. I was so excited to have reached that milestone. I'd heard so much about the book, and I wanted to be prepared because people that know me know I'm not a fly by the seat of your pants kind of person. But in the 22 plus years since I first purchased that book, I found myself saying so many times, that was not in the book. So some of those experiences are ones that are common to everyone. Things like, you know, you're about to put your children to bed and you suddenly find out that they didn't complete a homework assignment that's due the next day. Or you realize that it's really chaotic to get all of your kids off to school on time. Or you watch your child do something that you swore they would never do, like put a plastic bag over their head. So then there are the bigger things. And for our family, that included epilepsy and mental illness. All three of my children, as well as myself, are treated for various forms of mental illness, including depression, anxiety, and bipolar disorder. That wasn't what I had envisioned for our family, but it is part of our story. If we were all here in a room together, I would ask you to share your story. We can't really do that logistically, but I would ask you to do that at least in your head, because your story matters. It matters to everyone. So what I want to do this morning is I want to offer up to you nuggets of wisdom to help encourage you and help you persevere when raising a child with mental illness affects the entire family. A few years ago, I came across a poem that resonated with me deeply, and I'm sure it will resonate with most of you. I don't have time to share it in its entirety. Later on, I'll be putting my website in the link in the comments, and you'll be able to find the poem on there. But it's called Welcome to Holland, and it's by Emily Pearl Kingsley. And essentially what she describes is an experience in which you're on a flight where you presume you're going to Italy. But when you land, you hear the pilot announce that you're in Holland. Well, obviously you're feeling very confused, disappointed. This isn't what you expected. This isn't what you prepared for. And then you find out that you're staying in Holland. So you have to learn to adapt to it. And in addition, for the rest of your life, it seems everyone else you know is talking about going back and forth to Italy. The question then you have to ask yourself is, how do I navigate through this new place? When you raise a child with mental illness, it often feels like you landed in a foreign land. It isn't what you prepared for. It isn't what you expected. And you have to figure out how to navigate through it. So that is why I am here with you this morning, because I want to offer up some steps for you based on my own experience, based on my interactions with other families who are also trying to navigate through similar territories, so that you can learn to find your way. And the first step I want to offer up to you is to cling to God's promises. So I am a Christian, and for me, God's word is my compass, or to be a little more contemporary, it's my GPS. It's true through all places, all times, and all peoples. Even when the road in front of me seems really dark or foggy, it helps me find my way. So the first passage I want to lift up to you comes from Psalm 139:13. Leah had actually mentioned it earlier, but it's such a significant verse. You alone created my inner being. You knitted me together inside my mother. This verse reminds us that God knows our children so much more intimately than we do. God is aware of their afflictions. And while we certainly have every reason to question why they have the struggles that they do, why they have the affliction that they do, what we can take away from this promise is that God's purposes for them will never cease. Their value will remain despite their struggles. So we can embrace that promise. The second promise comes from 2 Corinthians 4:7-9. The Apostle Paul writes, in every way we're troubled, but we aren't crushed by our troubles. We're frustrated, but we don't give up. We're persecuted, but we're not abandoned. We're captured, but we're not killed. Sometimes I feel like that soda can on the ground with a foot hovering over it, just about to crush it to the ground. And perhaps you have felt like that too. What we can receive in this promise is that we will continue to walk forward, even if we feel a little hunched over at times. Jesus' power in us is so much greater than our circumstances. So we will continue to walk. That's our promise. So our first step, for me, the most important step, is clinging to God's promises. The second step is to seek out support. Several other of these wonderful sisters have mentioned the necessity of community. I am convinced that God designed us to be communal beings. We have to speak into each other's lives. We need each other. And sometimes that's really hard to acknowledge in a culture that emphasizes pulling yourselves up by your bootstraps. But I really believe that we are interdependent, and that's how we should function. When I talk about seeking out support here, what I'm specifically referring to is support with other people who are similar, who understand your story. They're walking in similar situations. It may be people who have already raised children with mental illness, although they're still parenting them, even if their children are adults. It may be other people around your age that are in the trenches of raising children with mental illness. But regardless, you need to find people that understand your situation. And the reason for that is these communities offer a safe, place for you to vent. Carrie mentioned the necessity of being able to share, in a vulnerable way, our negative emotions. We need to be able to do that. We also need to be able to ask questions. We need to be able to share concerns, and we need to be able to even celebrate milestones that our kids are achieving that people who aren't walking this experience might not understand. So I want to offer up to you a couple of options. And before I do that, there's a scripture verse from 2 Corinthians 1, 3 through 4, that essentially tells us that because God comforts us in our afflictions, we're able to comfort others. And I've heard the theme come out that beauty can arise from the ashes. And that's one way the beauty arises. That's how we know that God is living in us, is that God doesn't allow those circumstances to just remain futile. God wants to bring life out of those circumstances. And so we have the opportunity to be able to be God with skin on to each other because of what God has done for us. So I want to lift up to you, whoops, little technology issue here. I want to lift up to you some support group options for parents. This is not at all exhaustive. I would encourage you to please go on the internet, explore what's available to you. These are resources I am familiar with and that I know happen to be very safe places, non-judgmental communities. The first resource that I lifted up there, NAMI, stands for National Alliance of Mental Illness. It's a national organization with regional branches. I've taken classes through them. I'm certified to teach classes through them. And if you put your zip code into their website, you can find the programs that are offered in your area, which includes support groups. Now, they may not be specifically targeted towards children who have mental illness, but they may have them. But I just want to encourage you to go on that website and search around. There's tons of other resources on that website. Also, when you put in your zip code and you come up with your region, there's a contact name. And you can call that person and ask about other resources in your community, because many times NAMI partners with other mental health organizations. And you can also ask them questions pertaining to your own personal experience. They're more than willing to help you. And if they can't find an answer, they're going to point you to somebody who can. So I encourage you to explore that website. Now, the one thing about NAMI is you're more likely to find in-person support groups. The other links that I have put there happen to be online support groups. Each of us has our own comfort zone and our own accessibility factors. You have to do what works best for you. What I will tell you is that the last resource is a support group online that I just created a few weeks ago. I'd already had one for a group of parents that I knew from a therapy group. But I've come in contact with so many other parents who are walking our path that I wanted to create a group where it was a little more accessible. So if you put in help that wasn't in the book in your Facebook search, you'll find that group. However, it is a private group in the sense that nobody can see who's a member of that. Nobody can see what's posted unless they join it. So it's private in that sense. Do not feel obligated to join my group. You have to find one that fits best with you. But at the same time, please know that you're more than welcome to join it. We'd love to have you in our community. The second link that I want to set up for you is, whoops, little technological difficulties here. There. Resources for siblings. Now, Judy had actually referenced how hard it is for the siblings of the child that is presenting with the issues. For me, all three of my kids happen to have mental illness, but that doesn't mean that they were all presenting with episodes simultaneously. So at various times, when all my time and energy was going into one of them, the other two felt neglected. And that's true for families who have a child with any sort of illness. You know, kids don't understand that. They don't see the bigger picture. So we need to be able to acknowledge that what our other kids are experiencing. The first link that I have up there is actually a letter that a mother wrote to her child to address the fact that she knew that her daughter felt neglected because one of their children had special needs. It's a beautiful, beautiful letter. I just lift it up to you as sort of a springboard. Just keep it in the back of your mind as an awareness for your other children. Use it as a springboard for a letter that you can write to your children, or do something else creative, whatever. It's something for you to be aware of, and maybe help you put words into your thoughts. The other link that I have up there is a phenomenal website. It's targeted towards kids who have siblings with all kinds of special needs. But again, it's acknowledging the pain and the confusion that these kids sometimes feel. So there's book ideas on there, there's all kinds of articles, there's education. It isn't a support group in the sense that kids don't necessarily have like a chat room or anything like that. But again, there's other resources that you can look at in order to help your kids. I would love for there to be in-person support groups. My kids would have so benefited from it. But I know from the therapy group that treated my daughter, they tried to do that, but they run into logistical issues such as billing, for example. And sometimes there's confidentiality issues. But we just do what we can. It's true for anything. We can only do what we can. And at least this brings up an awareness of how we can address our other kids' needs. So recognizing the need that we seek support. We cannot do this alone. We aren't meant to do it alone. The next step that I want to lift up to you is the need to acknowledge our reality. There's a lot of reasons for this, actually, and I'm going to talk about two of them. But I think it goes without saying that we're always tempted to compare our lives to other people. And when we're on social media, it's so tempting. And particularly when you're in the trenches of something so hard, I think that's when the lure is really strong. We're looking around at other people's images, we're hearing them talk about things that they've done, and we start comparing our lives and we think, wow, that's so not fair. Why do they, why is their life going so swimmingly well? And the reality is that we don't know that. We really don't. And we all have valleys and mountaintop experiences at different times. So appearances really don't mean anything. What I love is a quote by Jen Hatmaker. She's an author. And she essentially says that we need to parent the child we have, not the one that we were, not the ones we thought we would have, but the ones that we are given. And acknowledging this reality is so important because these are the children that God gave to us. We are the parents that God provided for them. And God can work powerfully in this situation if we acknowledge that reality. So there are two specific reasons I want to lift up to you why we need to acknowledge our reality. The first one is that it allows us to educate other people. Now, certainly we can have boundaries with how much transparent we want to be. There's nothing wrong with that. But we also know there's a stigma with mental illness, and sometimes that keeps us stuck in shame. And I want to encourage you to step out of that. When we acknowledge our reality to those around us or those we feel comfortable acknowledging it to, we help educate them. There's a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of misinformation about mental illness. People fear what they don't know. I mean, we can see that certainly happening with all the posts about the COVID situation. So when we educate people, we help them not only understand our situation, but understand mental illness. And a byproduct of that is that you build a community. You now have people that say, wow, okay, I didn't know that you were going through that. I didn't understand what your needs were, but now I understand because you shared that. And you also have drawn them a little bit closer, probably, to your child. They're going to have a lot more understanding when they see your child have a meltdown. I know for us in church, educating was a key. Again, childhood mental illness is not really acknowledged. Even, I mean, it's taken a long time for it to get acknowledged, I should say. So a lot of people don't understand it, and particularly in the church, because there's so much judgment. If you would only pray harder, if you would change your parenting skills, you know, there's all those eyes you feel are on you and those thoughts. When we educate people about the fact that it's an illness just like diabetes, just like any other physical illness, then people start to understand it a little better, and then they have an idea of what they can do to help. So that leads to the second step, the second reason we need to acknowledge our reality, which is to receive help. And wow, again, living in our culture, there's almost a sense of shame of receiving help. But I am blessed when people that I know put out there that they need help. I've had friends put out a post on Facebook. I am going through a horrible time right now. They don't even share the details. They just say, you know what? You are my people, and I need help right now. If you could provide meals, it would be so appreciated. One time I went over to a friend's house because she had some difficulties after she gave birth to her second child, and I watched her older child, and I couldn't have been more blessed to be able to help her in that experience. So we have to be able to ask for help if we want people to be able to help us. So the question that I want to pose to you, and this is really important, is who are your people? Who are your people? You almost have two layers of community around you. You have a bigger community of people that can offer things like meals, perhaps drive your kids to activities if your one child has a doctor's appointment and you're not able to do that. They can do logistical things, but then you have a closer inner circle of people that you know that you can call on to vent, to cry on their shoulder, and they're going to understand. And they're not even going to necessarily ask questions. They're just going to be there to be present with you and ask what you need and provide it. And you really need to identify those people in your life. So for us, we have friends from church that have done a couple things for us. They've taken my other two kids, when one of my child was having an episode, they took our other two kids to their house regularly, actually, and were like grandparents to them. You know, doted on them, treated them in through food, through movies. Just let them be, because when you raise a child with mental illness, your house a lot of times is chaotic. It is very chaotic. It is, and I know from our experience that is something, actually all three of my kids are still working through. So to give your kids a respite is a gift. They've also taken my daughter, when they've seen her at her worst, and they've invited her into her home and allowed her to just spend time with them. They know what her skills are, what her likes are, and they've surrounded her just with unconditional love. She's also been welcomed into our neighbor's house, who again, they've their own kids actually have you know, heard some things not so nice come out of her mouth, but they still welcome her in and allow her to be a part of their family. So you need to identify those people in your life. They're so significant.
Stephanie, this
So
is,
last,
oh, do you have one more? You have one
yes, I do. One quick thing,
Share it
remember
away.
humor. Don't forget humor. Don't forget humor. You have to find humor. You know, science shows that it's so significant to your brain health. So it is. So find humor. And the last thing that I want to say is to receive God's mercies and grace. So much of what we deal with as parents anyway, or as people, is trial and error. And, you know, the videotapes easily come through our head of regret, and it can lead us into a dark place. So I want to read this passage to you. This comes from Lamentations. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Please embrace that. Please know that God's mercies for us are greater than all our regrets. We are forgiven. We get new chances. So embrace that promise. And I'm going to be posting my information in the comments. You can contact me anytime. We are not in this alone. Let's navigate through this new place together.
So good. So good, Stephanie. So practical. Thank you for sharing websites with us too. Like, you've just been a real gift. And so, yes, please. And if anyone has questions for Stephanie, please feel free to post them, because, you know, we're here, and she's right. I love the layers of community too, Stephanie. That was just beautiful. Thank you for being here. Well, I want to introduce our last speaker before I just close us off, but this is Gina. Gina was a last minute addition. I've never met Gina until now, and she is amazing. I am so impressed with her already. And when I heard that she had a book, Making Peace with Change, Navigating Life's Messy Transitions with Honesty and Grace, I'm like, you have to share, Gina, because this is very timely for this moment. And so, Gina, we welcome you.
Thank you. I'm just been really blessed to hear what everybody shared today. I am not a mental health expert, so I really appreciate the wisdom from those of you who are, but I'm no stranger to transition, and all of us are in this unexpected transition together right now. When I wrote my book, I did not have a pandemic in mind when I wrote it, obviously, but a lot of people have mentioned it's been helpful for them and timely, and I know it has been for me too. I feel like God's been bringing a lot of the lessons of it back to me, and asking me to put those things back into practice. It seems like the situation that we're in has either caused people to have a whole lot more to do or a whole lot less to do. And I'm in the latter category. The conference that I lead for our ministry was canceled, both the one that should have happened in March and the one that was supposed to happen in July. And Lee, I'm so glad you brought up the Enneagram. I love it myself. And as an Enneagram 3, who likes productivity and achievement and who can easily feed off of recognition and feeling valuable, that first week of sheltering in place just felt like death to me. I had nothing to do. And I'm watching other people like my husband being active and successful and in demand. And I'm over here feeling useless and unwanted. And it was like I was being sidelined from a game where I'm used to being a starter. So what was happening was that I was bumping up against desire. The desire to be valuable, the desire to be successful, to be meaningful, to belong, to have worth. And I was wrestling with it a lot. I would sit with God each morning in those first few days and just begging him to give me something worthwhile to do. Turning over those desires, wishing I didn't feel them so strongly, and just wishing that I could be content. But this is what unexpected seasons do. They stir up desire in us. Maybe like me, it's that desire to be productive or valuable. It might be a desire to be needed by others, or maybe right now, maybe a desire to be needed a little bit less. If you have little kids at home, maybe it's a desire for some peace and quiet. A desire to feel like you know what you're doing, or a desire for safety or certainty. I imagine we're all conscious right now of a desire to connect deeply with others that's really been disrupted by this situation, and it's so unnatural to not connect deeply. Probably you could identify even more specific desires related to losses that we've incurred in this situation. I'm among those who has a senior in high school this year, and so with my fellow senior moms, we still have that desire to see our kids walk at graduation. There are teachers at our school for whom this was their last year. One woman who's going to retire after being there since the school began. And so that desire to finish well has just been cut off. So we have to wrestle with whatever desire is being stirred in us. But I think desire has gotten a bad reputation in the church in particular. We think of desire as really wily and unmanageable and likely going to lead us down wrong paths. So I think we have a tendency to do one of two things with it. Maybe we try to shut the desire down. We minimize it, we spiritualize it, we pour contempt on it. We tell ourselves we shouldn't want something so much because, look what others have lost that's so much worse, right? Brene Brown says that at least is rarely the beginning of an empathetic statement, well, at least it's not as bad as so-and-so, right? We tell ourselves we should just be grateful for what we have. Or we tell ourselves we just need to have more faith and move on. I've seen a lot of people express a desire that they're feeling right now, and they call it selfish. And to call it selfish is just one of the many ways that we pour contempt on it. I've heard it said that contempt is like cauterizing a wound so that we don't have to feel the pain. Contempt can be so subtle, I'm realizing, that we don't even realize that we're doing it. I know I'm learning to pay attention to the language that I use towards myself, particularly around desire. It's amazing how quickly we can turn on ourselves when we don't want to feel something. That's exactly what I was doing with God when I was sitting with him those first few days. I hated that I wanted those things so much, as though if I hated it enough, maybe it was going to go away. And then I hated that I hated it because I knew that it meant I was being contemptuous towards myself, right? So my contempt has complex layers to it. But if we can't shut it down, then we'll demand that our desire be met some other way. We distract ourselves with food, with online shopping and Netflix and books. And that the energy of that desire expresses itself in things like control and anger and manipulation, as we're trying so hard to not feel that ache that's inside of us. The lesser things of the world become addictions because they aren't really what we want. We don't really get what we want. We get this something else that it's never going to be enough to truly satisfy us, no matter how much we try. So I've been reminded through a lot of the transitions that God has brought us through that there's another option, that we could sit in the unmet desire. And that's really painful. And that's why we try to kill it, or we try to distract ourselves. None of us wants that ache of unmet desire. But I think we need to sit with it in order for God to order it rightly. And that's how we avoid letting it lead us down the wrong path. We start, I think, with receiving it without judgment. Desire itself is God-given. We are created as creatures of desire. And that desire that stirs in me to be valuable, he gave that to me. He wants to speak to it. He wants to fulfill it. But he can't if I'm busy shutting it down or I'm off trying to satisfy it on my own. So instead, we call it good. We call it valid to feel these things. And we receive God's kindness and grace toward us. He doesn't condemn us for what we want. He honors our desires. He has compassion on the ache that we feel. When we moved back to the States, we were overseas for 13 years. Moving back to the States, that desire to be valuable in me, which I had become familiar with at that point, was so strong in me at times. It was a physical ache, because I had gone from a place where I was deeply known and valued for what I could offer others to a place where for the first year or so, I felt invisible. So I was sitting one day with God, wrestling with this desire to be valuable. And I could sit with the place where I knew in my head, God values me, right? But what I did with that is I turned it on myself and said, well, Gina, why isn't this enough for you? You know God values you. Why can't you just rest in that? And I felt like the invitation God gave me in that moment was, Gina, I see this desire to be valuable, and I honor that. But you felt valuable before, and now you don't. And that's worth grieving. And I think there's an invitation for us as we sit in the pain of unmet desire to grieve over what we have lost. In this season, we've lost so much. We've lost connection. We've lost dreams. We've lost certainty. And when we allow ourselves to grieve unmet desire, not only does it honor what we have lost, but it keeps us open to receiving from God, however he might fulfill that desire. So about a week into our shelter in place order, I started getting requests from people to help with various projects. You know, could you speak to this group? Could you write something here? Could you give input over here? And it was great. And for about 2 weeks, I was super busy and I loved it. And then I started wondering, well, am I just happy because I'm getting what I wanted? Like, how do I learn to receive these opportunities and not feed off of them? How do I not have to need this to be this way in order for me to be happy? So I shared this with a friend and she said, Gina, just take all of that desire to Jesus. Invite him into it. You're not meant to deal with this desire on your own. Let him sift through it. Thank him for the opportunity to feel the fulfillment of these desires. And it reminded me of a favorite verse, Psalm 38, verse 9. It says, all my longings lie open before you. My sighings are not hidden from you. Jesus wants to be part of us dealing with our desire. So one of the most common questions that Jesus asks throughout the Gospels is some version of the question, what do you want? Jesus is always calling out desire in people, and he wants us to bring that desire to him. So I'm in a program of spiritual formation with the Transforming Center with Haley Barton. One of the exercises that we did at our first retreat was to sit with Mark 10, 46 to 52, which is the story of blind Bartimaeus. And Bartimaeus cries out to Jesus as he's passing by. So Jesus stops and he turns and he calls Bartimaeus to himself and he says, what do you want me to do for you? So we were invited to sit in that passage, imagining Jesus asking us the same question until we were able to name the deepest cry of our hearts. That was a really powerful experience for me, and one that I go back to often now when I feel myself wrestling with desire, because it reminds me that Jesus sees me here in the mess with all that I'm feeling, and he wants that desire to lead me to him. God invites us in the unexpected seasons to recognize the desire that's stirring in us. He doesn't condemn us for what we're feeling or longing for in this season, whatever it is. He invites us to name that desire and to name what we're doing with it. And then sometimes the invitation is just to sit with that desire unmet, trusting him for the how and the when of its fulfillment. This is such a great opportunity to deepen our dependence on him, to recognize that he is the source of our satisfaction, to express gratitude for the way that he does fulfill our desire, to sink into the truth that ultimately he's what we desire most. So the question I would encourage each of you to ask is, what desire is this unexpected season stirring in me? How am I responding to that desire? How can I bring it before God and trust him with it? And if Jesus were to stand before you and ask, what do you want me to do for you? What would you say? He welcomes your answer. So I just want to close with Psalm 145, 15 and 16. It says, you give them their food at the proper time. You open your hand and satisfy the desires of every living thing. God sees what we long for in this season. Let's let our longing lead us to him.
Thank you so much, Gina.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you for reminding us that desire is okay and for your honest journey through that with us. And in this season, thanks. That just is so powerful to remember. And Gina, please make sure you write down your info in the chat, your book. I want to read your book. I think it's very timely. You know, God just knows exactly when to bring these things out, doesn't he? Yeah. Well, I'm not going to take very long. My name is Connie. 4 years ago, our family experienced a mental health crisis with our 8-year-old son, depressed, anxious, and suicidal. And my book, Bring Them Closer, tells you all about that. And I've started something called the Brave Parent Institute to help families through that right now. But what I want to do is just close with just a thought of resurrection, that everything that dies always has a hope to rise again. And when our son experienced this time of crisis in his life, depression for him showed up as anger and aggression, rage. But really, where that came from was the rage, aggression, and storm inside of me. And I realized in that time when the psychologist, we brought him to the hospital and the psychologist asked me, what do you do when your son is throwing these fits of rage? I said, well, I send him to his room. I tell him you can't come out until you're going to be a good boy. She said, oh no, you never send the hurting away from you. You bring them closer. So when we brought him home from the hospital 3 weeks later, sending him away was a lot easier than inviting the storm to sit with me, because his storm revealed my own. And while I was in my own storm, God spoke to me about death, dying inside, dying to the place of all the traumas and the disappointments and the experiences that had actually made me, myself, so angry. That now here was my son suffering, and he said, I don't send you away when you're at your worst, when you're feeling all of these emotions. Everything my friends have said here today doesn't send us away when we have desire, when we feel like we're mentally struggling, when we're in the deepest points of our pain. He actually brings us closer. And he says, on my chest is where you're healed and you're restored. And in that time, that's what I learned the most. There were days I just sat on my couch like, I just don't know how to deal with this anymore. And I remember God saying to me, lay on your back and watch me move. Watch me do a miracle. Watch me move on your behalf and resurrect what's inside of you. Behavior is communication. The behaviors that we have inside of us that come out in forms of words and actions, it's communication. It tells a very deep story about what's really happening on the inside. This week, I didn't realize how much this quarantine has affected me. And our dishwasher has broken, and that is a catastrophe and pandemic all in itself. And I had asked my boys to help me. And so each one of them would take a turn, and my oldest son was sick and he needed to go and rest. And that was okay, but I was sick too. And all of a sudden I looked at the vast amount of dishes on the counter and I felt alone in my struggle. And instead of asking for help, hey, friends, family, can you come and help me? Instead of doing it that way, I decided to slam all the cupboard doors. Slam, 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 slam. And surprisingly, I don't know why anyone didn't come to my rescue at that point. So I slammed harder, thinking, sure, my son says, yes, she did. And my little guy did come up to me, but I was so angry at that point that I felt so alone that I smashed a dish because I was so upset. And I scared my family. And I remember feeling now shame. Now I have guilt. My behavior was communicating something deeper inside of me than anger. And inside of me was actually this trigger of feeling alone and feeling sad, feeling loss. And sometimes we don't realize how much our body keeps the score of these things that are happening to us right now. And I hope what you've heard through the entire morning that we have spent together is that A, you're not alone. And B, the experiences of all of us, we've all been there. What are the behaviors and things that have come up for you? What has God been speaking to you this morning? What does he want to resurrect in your life as we lay ours down, as we lay our burdens down? We often as Christians focus on the cross, but the truth is that the resurrection is always available. I love Colossians 3. Christ's resurrection is your resurrection. There's always a hope that something will come. And as we abide in him, he says that he will prop up the weak branches, the ones that feel like they can't carry on. He props them up. And then he prunes the fruitful. Blessed are those who are fruitful. We get pruned. But what comes out of that is more life than we can ever know. And what I can say from the season of crisis in our own life, and you know what? Crisis never really gets fixed. We don't fix mental health issues. We don't come out of struggle. We keep walking through. You don't get a new kid by Friday. You don't get a new husband by Sunday. You don't just fix things. We need to lay down our expectations of life all of a sudden becoming perfect. But he does say that he is able to take the hardships and the hard things that we don't expect in our lives, and he is able to resurrect things that we never knew he could resurrect. And out of that season, coming into a quarantine season, I remember what he has done in the past. I remember his mercies. I remember how he has moved us through crisis before, and he will do it again. It is going to be okay, because the one who holds the earth holds you, and he holds me. Pay attention. Allow him into those dark, deep places. As everyone has mentioned here, they are allowed. He allows them in his presence. And in his presence, we come alive. He also speaks to the fig tree and says, do something. I just want to remind us that the fig tree that he spoke to, it was out of season. Sometimes he is able to take things out of season. It would seem crazy in this moment, in quarantine, in a pandemic, for miracles to happen, but he says, produce something, because it's possible. And I want to just encourage you before we leave, that out of whatever is being buried right now, something can be resurrected. Look for it. Look for his coming in your life right now. We promise you that as you walk, we're going to walk with you. We're going to stay brave. We're going to stay courageous, and we're going to stay connected to the one who holds us all. And so we want to thank you so much for coming, everyone. I'll post my my website as well if you want to stay in touch. But we want to thank you for being here. If you have any questions right now, please feel free. We would love to answer any questions you have before we leave. I'm seeing different bringing the hurting closer. Thanks, guys. Thank you. But I'll give you just a moment to ask any questions that you have or any comments. Allow it to sink in. It has been an encouraging time. And yes. And it's been really beautiful to bring people together from all over North America today. Oh, yes. And I will be sending this recording to everyone who is registered, whether you're here, whether you could only come for parts of it, those who couldn't get on the Zoom, it will be sent to all. But yes, thank you again. And Brenda, you have given your email to everyone. I've got your email, you bet. I will be sending you the recording. Well, if there's no further questions, just want to bless you in the name of Jesus. May your hearts be strong. May your spirit be brave, and may you rise through the storm. Thank you so much, everyone. And absolutely, Jody, you can share the recording. And thank you to the speakers again. Thank you to all you Redbuds. You're just so beautiful. Thank you for this time. It's been wonderful. Do you want to, how about you unmute? You can unmute and say goodbye. We've all been muted.
Thanks, Connie.
Yeah. Thank you, Connie.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Bless you all.
So good to do this with all of you at the same time.
Yeah. Well, have a great day, everyone.
Okay. Bye.